This is the fifth seminar in our series of 6 seminars for the autumn of 2020. The whole series is entitled Beyond Survival, and the intention is to think about what the cultural sector, you define culture, I'm not going to, but how will the culture sector respond after the end of the coronavirus problems? Naturally, the focus has been on how you get through this very difficult period with closures, probably having to let staff go when you can't do the work you love, when you can't engage with your communities. That's been the main focus, but I'm looking in these seminars, the series of efesai seminars, at what's going to happen long term. And this includes questions which have been really needed to be addressed for a long time. What about business models? So we're really going to rely on getting everybody into one place at one time to demonstrate our art. What about the measurement of impact? What really are we doing with our societies? Shall we look at that? The next seminar on the 9th of December will be about the role of local government, which is crucial everywhere, perhaps particularly in the Netherlands. And today's session, Engage or Die, is about engagement of cultural organizations with their communities, however you define that. So we've had a tremendous range of speakers from many countries, from Germany, from Britain, from the United States. Atiba, you're the second New Yorker who's spoken in this seminar series, and of course from the Netherlands. We have recorded these sessions and put an edited version of the presentations on YouTube, and we'll share that link with participants. But today, back to the basic question, engage and die. There has been a long debate in the sector, in every country, about what it means for a cultural organization to be engaged with its community. This is very much tied up with the questions of inclusion and diversity. Not exactly the same question, but very closely connected. And today, we're really delighted that we have 3 speakers who can speak with experience and authority on this subject. Atiba Edwards, who's the Chief Operating Officer of the Brooklyn Children's Museum. Ernestine Convalius, the Director of the Bijlmer Park Theater in Amsterdam. And Simone Seefauk, who also works with the Bijlmer Park Theater and is a writer in her own right. That was a joke and I didn't intend that. The English language has problems sometimes. But I'm actually going to let them do introductions, and then we'll be asking each of the participants some questions, which will hopefully lead to a discussion. And then after 50 minutes, an hour, we'll be throwing the floor open to other people participating, because really we want a good discussion on these topics. So first of all, Atiba, would you tell us something about yourself and how your organization engages with its community?
Sure, thank you. I have a quick slide deck I'll show there, but so Atiba Edwards, I'm the Chief Operating Officer and Executive Vice President at the Brooklyn Children's Museum. And we are the world's first children's museum, founded in 1899 and located in central Brooklyn. And our primary audience is 6 neighborhoods of central Brooklyn that we will say we super serve. And those neighborhoods in total population dwarf the size of Boston, Detroit, and many other places. And what I pulled and showed here are just 3 out of our 6 tenets that we have and we've publicly shared as our commitment to our Brooklyn community. The first is building a community for parents and children in Brooklyn. The second is reaching beyond our walls into schools and other neighborhoods as we do programming, outreach, and partnerships. And then the third is using local vendors and supporting small businesses throughout Brooklyn, throughout New York City, whenever possible. There are 3 other tenets as well that are part of our commitment to our community, but I just want to highlight these 3 because I think they parallel well into today's topic. In my role, I oversee a series of departments and lines of business functions, from finance to marketing to HR and several others I didn't list on here. But additionally, I serve as the chair of the IDEA committee. So that's inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility for New York City's cultural institution groups. And those are 34 cultural institutions that are on or working through city-owned land. And as a result, they do get funding from the city. In my role, I just started that role in early May, and it got publicly announced in July. But my role is to help all of these cultural institutions and our larger audience of the cultural organizations throughout New York City really develop tools and to support their work as it relates to IDEA, or also known as DEI or DEIA. I renamed it to IDEA because I think the tenets and the 4 primary principles are the idea we're achieving, and it's really the idea we want to realize. And they're not a static place where you don't sort of high five and check a box saying you've accomplished them. An idea is something you have to continuously work towards. So that's the work I do here, and I'm excited to join my colleagues in New York and across, but also more importantly, my colleagues in the Netherlands. And thank you, David, for this invitation.
Thanks very much, Atiba. I had no idea it was the world's oldest children's museum. That's impressive.
Yes.
And I'm going to turn now to Ernestine and Simone. You're doing a double act, so you decide uh, who's going to speak first. Uh, we really we really want an introduction to you personally, but also to the Balmer Park Theatre and your work there. And just let me know when you want me to bring up the slides that you want to show.
Okay, I'll start and then Simone will take it from there. I'll keep it short. Thank you, Dave. Let me say thank you first for letting us join this conversation. I'm Ernestine Convalius. I'm born in Suriname, raised in the Netherlands, and I studied social sciences, and I have an education in the performing arts and post-academic training in organizational science and change management. For the past 22 years, I've worked as a director in the performing arts sector. And besides that, I'm active in advisory boards of art and cultural organizations and of funds and in several commissions. So I'm a co-founder of the Bijlmer Park Theatre, situated in the eastern part of Amsterdam, with a diverse population, mostly African Caribbean, but the whole world is actually represented in our part of Amsterdam. We are the first professional theater in this area, strongly community-based, even though later on we will talk about what it means. But this diversity is reflected in our theater programs, our audience associates, the talent programs, the partners we choose, and also the education programs in the schools. We have founded a youth theater school, but also a theater working place. And actually we are participating in the cultural vitality of the whole neighborhood. So in one way, we are a conventional theater, like other theaters, a venue, but I think we work in an unconventional way. So that, and now Simone, you can take it on.
Thank you. Well, David, thank you so much for the invitation, and Atiba for your beautiful story about the Children's Museum. David, if you could show the first slide that people can have an idea of what our theater looks like. Thank you. And my name is Simone Sevak. I'm a writer and I'm a cultural programmer at the Belmont Park Theater. Been working there, I think, since 2014 as a freelancer, and since 2.5 years now, like I said, like a regular employee. And I'm doing the talks, the panel discussions, the lectures, and the movie screenings at Belmont Park Theater. So this is our amazing theater, what it looks like in the evening. It's, as Ernestine said, in the center of the Belmer. And if you would go to the next slide, please, David. This is our team, and yesterday we had a very special moment, and I will show you a picture of that afterwards. But this is our team, a diverse team, an inclusive team, and a team of experts and professionals. And yeah, proud to be a part of it. And if you go to the next slide. So this happened yesterday, and Stina didn't mention it, but it was a big deal for all of us. So after 10 years of Belmont Park Theater, the first ever director and co-founder, she had to pass the baton to an equally amazing person called Yolanda Spool. So in fact, Ernestine is no longer the director of the Belmont Park Theater. Well, she will be, of course, forever in our minds, in our hearts. But we had a little shift yesterday, so it was an interesting moment.
Mhm.
Um, and I feel like, and we can talk about this later, if you're so community rooted and you're carried by somebody who is such an icon in the community, it gives you the freedom to program as you would like to program also. So if you would go to the next slide, that's the end of my introduction. So these are the kind of programs I will be working on next year. And we talked about, so we're a theater, but we also do other things. So we do classes, we do talks, and the talks aren't always about theater plays or things like this. So we have talks, for example, about a new film coming out. I hope everybody's excited about Ma Rainey, and Viola Davis is portraying Ma Rainey. So we're also talking about like unpacking storylines. We're also reading the work of, for example, Marie Condé, and we're looking at political movements in countries like the Sudan, but also Nigeria, and looking at how do political movements shape artistic movements and where do they intertwine. So we're a theater, but because we're so deeply rooted in the community, we also like to give space to the conversations that the different parts of the communities are having at this moment.
Introductions out of the way, you can see what we have here are three people who understand their work as directors and workers at a cultural organization. They understand their work, at least in part, to be about engaging with their communities. Their communities are different, they define them differently, but that's a fundamental part of what they do. However, that idea of engagement is not universally shared. And for many cultural organizations, it's only just come into their consciousness. And for some, I would have to say, they think the idea of engaging with communities actually stands against the core work that they do. If really you understand your work as making and then presenting fantastic art, the more you think about the people in your area or the people who might come and buy tickets, the more you think about them, the more that's going to interfere in the work that you primarily do. Sure, there are some organizations who are set up precisely to be community engaged, community theatres, community arts activities, but they're a minority, and let's be honest, to some extent, they're regarded as the poor relation of the high art organizations. Not something I like, but something which I think we might all recognize. So I'm thinking about cultural organizations in general. I'm going to ask each of you in turn. Tibra, I'll start with you simply because you have had a little pause now, so you're back. Why on earth should arts organizations, should cultural organizations engage with their communities? Why should they? That's not necessarily their central job.
I think it's imperative to the work that they set out to do, and it's part of the name. When you think about culture, culture reflects communities and communities. And I think it'll probably touch on this later, but the first calculated step is defining what that community is. But more importantly, engaging with your community is really essential to your survival. Communities are such that are so powerful and strong. And I think right now in the last 6 months, 7 months plus, we're seeing that manifest itself in a way where, particularly in New York City, but also across the US, when we've had cultural organizations or art organizations who've always kept themselves a part of communities, but still wanted to highlight and share diverse work, what you're starting to realize is that communities will shape the things that are catered toward them and cater to them, I should say. And when those things are resistance of being shaped and malleable, then we start to see them being forcefully being broken. So you think about a piece of clay as an organization, it can be shaped by the community to provide what the community feels is welcoming. And when it is resistant to that, you think of it as a pencil where it actually is broken and you have a lot of challenges to face. And also more importantly, I think it's imperative that cultural organizations, art organizations engage with their communities because that allows a lot of missteps, meaning oftentimes we set out to say, okay, I want to provide for X culture and X community. And more often than not, when you think about diversity of these organizations, it's lacking in the communities they're trying to serve and outreach. So you have this usurping of power and sort of higher than, as you're mentioning, like we are the art, we know what's good for you, so we're going to provide and prescribe to you. And that really isn't a healthy manner to exist and coexist. And you have a lot of chances to learn. And I think one of the other things is just understanding it's a calculated risk you have to take with engaging with communities, and cultural organizations at large are generally risk adverse, kind of like to do just enough without rocking the boat too much. But the importance of engaging with the community is best realized as you start to see the beauty of the community shape what we do and what we provide for our visitors and our guests, and also really shape some of the programming that we're doing to make it as encompassing as possible. So I think the title of this slide, this title of this presentation summarizes it best. Like cultural organizations, art organizations must engage with the community, or they do face the risk of dying a figurative speech of death or a literal sense of death when you start to have communities rise up against systematic issues that have been long salient, but now at a time where it's a tipping point where we have a chance to help right some of the wrongs and really think about the fact that we are reflective of our times and our times are much more diverse. So we do have to open the doors to communities in a way that is inclusive but also engaging.
So thanks, Atiba. And I'm going to turn now to Simone and Ernestine to look at the same question. Why on earth should arts organizations, not just your organization, but why should arts organizations in general engage more widely than with their producing colleagues? Ernestine, you're going to take this one?
Okay. Yes, I liked what Atiba said, and I think it applies to the Netherlands. For example, in 2011, when there were huge budget cuts and the minister didn't see the importance of culture and art, the art sector was, screaming and frustrated, but who supported them except the own organizations. So that, for me, that was an example of how important it is to that we shouldn't be isolated. That the people would see, our audiences would see the importance of art and culture, that they would also recognize that the art organizations are also involved in what happens in communities, and then communities will defend you. So I really like that statement, engage or die, because the world also in the Netherlands is changing. You have young people, just like Atiba said, who are reflecting on their history. You have, for example, nowadays, the Black Lives Matter movement. You have these social movements in the Netherlands against Black Pete. Well, as an art organization, if you neglect all these movements, at a certain moment, you will see that you will be history yourself. That's what I want to say.
I completely agree with both Atiba and Ernestina. And I feel like the communities now, like speaking from a Dutch perspective, the communities now dictate who is and who isn't relevant. So for you to say like, oh wait, I'm in a room. Yes. So for you, so for you to then say like, oh, we're not gonna engage, is such an arrogant position, and you can see that in the Netherlands. It's no longer an option, because then you would like the community to come in when you want to sell the tickets, but the community doesn't forget. So you have one place in Amsterdam that's known for having such a racist program. But every now and then they invite a Black Lives Matter activist to come in and give a great talk show. And like, oh, but we need to sell those tickets now. You can, because you have a track record of not doing that kind of work. And also, we're here in the modus of saying, well, engaging is maybe not enough. You have to commit. Because engaging is a very loose statement. Engaging can also be like, oh, we're going to hire this one rapper to do an audio tour one time in a museum, and that would be enough. But how are you committed to these struggles? So putting up one black square and saying BLM because you don't really want to say Black Lives Matter, that's not a good way for us to engage. So what are you doing for the communities that you want um, to be connected to your cultural institution? So I think there's no way beyond it. There's no way beyond it anymore.
Okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate because that makes for
Oh,
better conversation. The thing is that, in fact, in the Netherlands, the survival of cultural organizations is mainly determined by the government. Now, that's not literally true. Organizations need to sell tickets, they need to generate donations, business partnerships, they have cafes and restaurants. But fundamentally, for many cultural organizations, the only master they serve is the local government and perhaps the national government.
hmm.
Effectively, what this means is that the survival argument you've all just put down is less relevant because in the end, a substantial part of the money will come from the government anyway. So is there another reason why organizations should be engaged with their communities?
Because of their spirit and their ethics. But the thing is this, you had a lot of subsidy requests where it was mandatory to prove how you would engage with different communities. So you had to prove as an organization, say like how are you picking up what we call like diversity and inclusivity? And everybody was using these hollow phrases saying, oh, we're going to be more diverse, we're going to look for news stories. And you see that a lot of organizations actually had their money cut because people said this isn't believable for us. So the days
Mhm.
of saying I can do what I want to do and I only answer to the government and the government is not forcing me to engage with our communities, those days are over. And it caught
Mhm.
some people by surprise. And
Yeah,
but it doesn't make it less true for them, unfortunately.
yeah. I think it's very important what Simone is saying. And that is also what I have been noticing. For example, I have been in the advisory commission of Utrecht, one of the bigger cities. And there it was really mandatory that the organizations should prove that they are involved with their community, that they also have a policy on diversity and inclusion. And it had consequences. So even the government policy is changing because of the pressure of communities, of young people, but also of different communities also. So if the culture organizations are so depending on the budget of the government, they are vulnerable because that policy changes too.
Atiba, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, and I think to build on Simone's earlier point too is that with the advent of technology, nothing that you do can be forgotten now. Nothing that you say cannot be forgotten. Nothing that you try to hide can be forgotten. So you have this groundswell of communities who are able to pull from something you did yesterday, something you did 5 years, and call that to task. And we're seeing a lot more community organization taking place. We're seeing a lot more coalitions taking place. So when a community is frustrated by somebody's actions, they're going to go and make a lot of noise, and that noise will eventually land on the politician's front door.
Mhm.
Politicians are mainly in the job of trying to please as many people as possible. Oftentimes that's weighted to the folks with the money, but you can't ignore a march or a gathering or a protest or anything. Or I mean, with technology you can stream across Twitter and everything go live feed to say, I want to call out this organization or this board member because of X, Y, and Z, and I demand action. And after a while, that multiplier effect is going to impact the government and politics. We're saying, okay, this is what you said you've done. Here's what's actually happening based on the community's scorecard, if you will. We have to reallocate some things to some folks who are doing things better. And the beautiful thing of communities and engagement are communities can also start to uplift and amplify voices of cultural organizations, arts organizations that were often not on the radar of the persons in the pocketbooks who were able to fund them. So yes, while most of the funding may come from the government, and it's somewhat similar in New York City as well for some of the larger institutions, the government is even more risk adverse than a cultural organization, meaning if they are funding someone who has a bad track record that's suddenly being called out frequently and often, you're going to see a quiet stepping back from that and reallocation as well. So it's the power of community to shape and determine anyone's future, particularly organization's future, is really one of the undercurrents of why it's important to engage with them now. Because as Simone mentioned as well, like the younger people, can define that how you will, are the people who are growing up to then carry these institutions forward or carry them off of the cliff.
Thanks a lot. And you've raised a couple of really important points there between you. The first thing is that indeed, governments, local and national, are now changing the way they think about their funding for culture. I've been working in the Netherlands for 15 years, lived here for 6. When I first moved here 6 years ago, the whole question of inclusivity, diversity, the questions of engagement were really not on the agenda. It was still, what can you call it, a sort of a holy temple kind of view of cultural funding, is that you funded the high priests who would make wonderful art available for anybody to see if they chose to come and see it. That attitude has changed dramatically, and I think will change even more. And just to add to that, of course, the amount of money available for the cultural sector is going to be challenged. Next week, we have a seminar with people from the United Kingdom and the Netherlands talking about the role of local government. And local governments who fund a tremendous amount of culture or cultural organizations, they will be suffering badly financially themselves. And so it's not entirely clear how much money will be coming through from those sources in the future. So it seems that just from the point of view of survival, quite apart from the ethical, moral, cultural reasons to engage, that is a pretty good bet that organizations will now have to take this area very much more seriously in the future. But now we're coming to a question which I'd like you to address, which is, what on earth is our community? So Bijlmer Park Theater is in Bijlmer, Brooklyn Children's Museum is in Brooklyn. That's a pretty good clue about what your area of physical engagement is. But if I look at the example, there are many, but if I looked at the example of the National Theatre in The Hague, well, it's located in The Hague, so more people from The Hague probably come and buy tickets there, but it's supposed to be the theatre for the entirety of the Netherlands. So how can an organization define what is its community?
So I think it's the first is I would call it the 5 mile radius that you're located. So Brooklyn Children's Museum, our 5 mile radius covers most of central Brooklyn and others, but also it's thinking about who do you want to see in the building, because the community is more than the zip code, or more than the postal code, if you will. So I think the community is really a composition of communities. So where we're located in central Brooklyn, we have three primary communities: African American, West Indian or Caribbean American, and Jewish. Those are sort of the three primary communities that we overlap. But also, if you think about Brooklyn, it's one of the most diverse places on the earth, I'd go to sort of imagine. So what we have to keep in mind as we plan is, how do we try to make sure we can encompass as many people as possible who would feel welcomed because they see their community or their culture being highlighted, but also at the same time, how do we make sure we can invite others who may not be part of that cultural community to then learn something and grow from there. So we spend the time trying to define who all do we want to see in our building, because within the world of Brooklyn Children's Museum, both the physical space and online, to me, that's how we define our community, is really thinking about who are the people we want to see. And it's a tricky answer because we want to see everyone. And our primary community is always central Brooklyn and Brooklyn at large. So we think about the diversity that's replicated there, and we use that to define all the programming and outreach and partnerships that we do as well. But I think community is first defined by your immediate 5 mile or I can't translate the kilometer, sorry.
Thanks.
Yeah, so that surrounding area, because oftentimes what takes place are you tend to program and want to define your community as anything other than your surrounding neighborhoods or your surrounding locals, because you're here, but you want to bring everybody else from out where in. So I think, to me, that's how I define it. That's how we define at Brooklyn Children's Museum, is our primary community central Brooklyn, but then we plan for Brooklyn, New York City, and the world in concentric outward circles.
I think it depends, because if you're a theater, you have different kinds of programs. So you want to attract different kind of audiences. So for example, we have this program called Belmer Classic, which is a classical program that's happening on Sunday mornings, which has a very different audience than, for example, when we do a Black Magic Woman festival. And we had that last year, and we normally target not so much in the city, but I think predominantly maybe Amsterdam and Rotterdam. Those are the groups that we expect to come. But it was somebody who came all the way from the southern parts of the Netherlands. And the Netherlands is a small country, but if you live in the southern part, it also means that you have to catch a train in time, or you will not be going home. You had people coming from the far north of the Netherlands, basically because they said we don't have these kind of programs where we live. And we saw it online, somebody shared it, and they took the train for 2 hours to come and visit the program. So I think it depends on the kind of programming that you would have, for me at least. But I'm not sure what Ernestina thinks.
Yeah, I think so too. Um, I think it's important to define your communities and make the program also for and with these communities. Uh, so, for example, um, and that you also have to reflect during the years on who are you reaching, who are you, and whom would you like to reach. For example, at a certain moment, we also talked about, let's, for example, the LHBTQI LGBTQ plus community, and we realized we needed also knowledge about this expertise about this community, and then you work with the community because you think it's important that this community also has a stage. And so it differs. We are not only working for the Southeast, we are from the Southeast, but not only working for the Southeast. So we are always reflecting on what is happening in society. What are the stories over there, and whom would we include to in order to make programs for certain communities? So it's an exchange, it's an ongoing process, and I think even if you are the national theater, it's important to be interested in what is happening around you, not only in your neighborhood, but in the Netherlands, in the city, and then make these decisions about whom you want to involve.
And maybe also couple community as like this combination between interest and identities. Because I
Yeah.
feel, at least in the Netherlands, we often see that people, for example, when you have the Pride period, and people say, oh,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to do a lot of programs about queerness. But then what happens
Right.
in February?
Mm-hmm.
Nothing, so to say. So what happens
Yeah.
if you don't always invite people based on um, the community that you consider them to be part of, but based on their interests, for example? And then
Mm-hmm.
see like, okay, but we're now talking about dance, but are these different communities that we would like to involve all year round, are they in some way represented in this program?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that would be, for me, that's a better way of programming and looking at like a specific, because I feel like if you're not part of a community, um, you're gonna create something for the community based on what you think that they would need.
Yeah. They have to be part of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I think that engagement you mentioned, Simone, is essential too, because it ties back to some of the earlier discussions where when you are programming because you think this is what they want, the community wants, that's when you end up running into a lot of trouble, because you walk into a space that in your mind, like, yes, we encompassed and showed everything and we did everything right, but then you have members of those communities or members who are interested in those communities walking in and then ultimately calling you out because this was done in a way that was very totalitarian, where you said this is what you want and you're telling me what's good for me, and also it wasn't done in a way that's inclusive. And I think, like, so we do about 12 festivals a year, and one of them is Celebrate the Caribbean. I immigrated from the Caribbean, the island of St. Vincent, so I felt, yes, I can help program that, and like that is something I feel I can speak to. But then a couple months before that, we did something around Tu B'Shvat, which is a Jewish tradition, and I knew that was something I did not have any expertise. I was interested in, but let's figure out how do we partner. And we did
Mm-hmm.
something Lunar New Year. Similarly, no one on our staff at the time can identify with that culture and that interest, and I can speak to that. So that's when we're encourage, and it's always one of our practices, and I think it's a key part of engagement, is going out to those communities you're trying to program for, and then
Mm-hmm.
opening the door and bringing them into the room in a way that's both constant and sustainable. Meaning, let's not just be very parasitic where, as you mentioned, Otis, like, I need this one person for now because it's going to be a really great headline and it ties into this event. It's no, how do we stay with them as a partner so that maybe
Mm-hmm.
every quarter or every year they're one of our programming partners. So the communities community is a word that is, to me, a combination of communities, but it's really important as you're thinking about who's programming and who is doing that programming,
Mm-hmm.
because that's where the aspect of community engagement really has a chance to thrive and
Mm-hmm.
strive. And oftentimes it's a place where cultural organizations, arts organizations tend to fall short because they either are reticent and afraid to engage with those communities, or they don't know the right way, or they're very risk averse. So they think let's not open the door and let's plan for this ourselves. And as a result, they actually fail more often than they succeed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, one
Can I
thing, Ernestine, please.
Yeah, can I ask Atiba? So, are you also saying, just at least I am saying that it's not only because you have to sell your tickets, but the development of these communities are of importance to you. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and I think I would even flip it. The more important thing to the more important thing I feel is the development of these communities, because that then will sell the tickets. That then will make people
Mhm.
feel welcome. That then will
Yeah.
have people feeling like this is a space that's welcoming for me.
Hmm.
Oftentimes, the arts organizations and cultural organizations feel less welcoming to most. But if you were to flip it in that, let's go out and actually develop and engage and connect with these communities, that's going to take care of all the other tangible, financial, sustainable things. But for me, it's always let's develop relationships with those communities that are long lasting and repeating, and then the tickets will come. But we don't think about let's sell tickets by bringing in that big act, because then it always remembers like you only come to me when you need me. And
That's
that is
right.
hard to forget right now. So when you start coming to me, I'm going to say no, and I'm just going to do something completely different.
Mm.
Okay, I'd like to come on to the question of programming in just a moment, but just to emphasize what I've heard you all three say is that, first of all, there is no such thing as the community. There are many different communities. Presumably, we can even go further than that and say there is no such thing as the Jewish community, the Black community. These are
Mhm.
different groups of people who may share certain characteristics. And just following on from what you've all said is that the only way to really understand the people around you, however you define that radius, is by getting to know them and inviting them to being rather humble and inviting them to tell you their feelings and sharing your thoughts with them just as freely.
Mhm.
Um, a question for today, and when I say today, I mean this moment in time, is what about online communities? Because, of course, up till now, a cultural organization has generally been about a physical location. Even a touring company will be in a series of physical locations. But the process of using digital media has been developing over years, and in this last year has become really at the front of engagement with people for showing our work, for selling tickets, for achieving donations, which leads to the possibility that in the future there could be very successful artistic companies that have no physical location whatsoever. So from in your thinking for the future, I'm thinking now about your organizations in the future, how will you engage with communities which could be based all around the world?
I think, Simone, actually you are developing that kind of work, right? With with the talk shows, etc., which you were talking about. Could you dwell on it?
Yeah, I'm gonna do a series of talks online. So we're actually figuring out the answer to your question, David, as we go along.
Let me know.
Um, yes, I will. And I'm not the most technical person, so I hope I will have that answer. Um, but I'm actually looking more towards organizing based on, like I said before, interests, and
Mhm.
having people from different countries weigh in and talk from their personal experience, from their local experience and national experience. And I think that's the thing that's making it more interesting. So, for example, when we have the conversation about blues women depicted in autobiographical films, I invited different people from different European communities, Afro-European communities, to weigh in on the subject. Um, and hopefully that will have like a broader audience based on people's interest in these films.
Mhm.
I really hope so. But I think with online things, it's accessible for everybody. What makes it,
Yeah.
I think, important is that you monitor properly who gets access to the space. So you don't
Mhm.
want the racist folks to come in and start yelling to the live stream. But I feel like if you're making it a safe enough space, people will get drawn into that because these are one of the only options we have in the Netherlands. Theaters are open, but you have like a small number of people that can come inside the building. Um, so the whole vibe is different than before. So it might be better if you stay in your house to watch a broadcast. So it's
Mhm.
it's very experimental still.
For the performing arts, it is killing
Mm.
if it would be only online, because the magic of the performing arts is in the meeting of each other and in experiencing it together. So, yeah, you lose a lot when everything would be online.
But it's also fun. I joined a panel the other day when we talked about Lovecraft Country, the series. And we were in conversation with people from all over the globe. And it was such a nice space because you had, I think, maybe three speakers, and people were having an entire conversation in the chat and figuring out like where would I ever have met these people. And but somebody
True.
said one word of a character or the name of a character, and just the
Yeah.
chat room was really, it was popping. It was so lovely, and
Yeah.
it was 2 o'clock in the morning in Amsterdam, and maybe it was like 4 in the afternoon somewhere else. But at that moment, we were the community. we were the
Hmm.
community of people coming together and discussing
Yeah.
something we were very passionate about. Um,
Yeah.
that's something that would have never happened in another space. So I think we should also be thankful for the
Yeah.
possibility, at least, of organizing online.
Yes. I agree with you. I was talking about the performances
Yeah, I know.
themselves,
Yeah,
you
yeah, I
know,
missed that too.
and that's something else. But
Yeah,
yeah, I
I think this is clearly an area. I mean, it's absolutely relevant to the question of engagement and definition of our communities and inclusion. The technical elements is, I think, not the issue at all. It really is about how we engage with people remotely, and everybody is thinking about this right now, and some have been thinking about it for much longer. The FSI seminar series this autumn does not include a session on digital theatre, digital arts, global inclusion. We had to stop somewhere. We may come back to this question in the new year if we continue this series of seminars. And for me, the important thing with this question of online communities is not the technical aspects at all. It's how you engage with people wherever they're coming from. So yeah, challenges, but also great opportunities. I'm going to
but
move
David,
back
can I add to
now.
that? Can I add something
Yes, of
to that?
course.
Because I think when we talk about communities, it does matter. The technical part does matter because some communities have less access
Okay.
to these technical means than others. So it's also considering like what does it mean to, for example, want to watch a play in a very small home and you have like small children running around. So I think it is important to take into account that maybe you want to start your program later. And it's also something that I don't always think about, but I think it's something to keep in the back of our mind.
I'm going to move back to the question of programming, which was raised already. This is a very touchy subject, it really is. And clearly, if you're the esteemed and famous and gifted artistic director of a theatre, an art museum, an opera company, then the idea that you should pay attention to the wishes, the feelings, the motivations, the opinions of community, however you want to define that, is not a good feeling. You've probably been brought up in an environment where the artist really has to be separated, literally separated from the people with the money, separated from the people who have to sell the tickets, separated from the people who actually attend, because actually the making of art requires them to be focused on their inspiration and that of the colleagues around them. So can we reassure those traditional artistic directors that inviting communities to engage in discussions about programming will not be the death of high quality art?
She's biting her lip. I think she's ready to go.
I know I wasn't sure. I didn't want to jump. Ernestine, it's
Atiba,
you.
go
So
ahead,
anyway,
Atiba.
you,
Atiba,
you
go ahead.
can jump. No, well, actually, I'm just laughing. Maybe it's because of my attitude. Uh, I'm not trying to convince anybody. Maybe that's why I was laughing, uh, because I'm very much convinced of just developing things and putting the example, and then they will see. So that's why I was laughing. But Atibe, I would like to hear your point of view.
thank you very much. I think David, to that question, it's the importance. Well, actually, I'll flip it. The benefit is also the community has a better sense of what's happening wider around. So you have a chance to learn about and be the place to launch several careers and launch several opportunities and launch several artists into a space that they normally weren't. And when you think about this notion of often high art enter whatever type of discipline of art, that means you're already, someone's already taking the stance like this is better than everything below it. So when you have that community engagement, you almost flatten that model in a way of saying, here's something really great you should know about, or here's an artist really great that you should know about, or here, like, we understand this is a program you're doing, here's a community you're trying to interact with. Allow us to be in dialogue with the community members to figure out what actually makes the most sense, what actually is the programming that they ultimately want to see. And it's a really tricky thing because sometimes the community doesn't know what is possible. So as a result, they're working with the framework of what they know. He has a very bad reputation, but so Henry Ford is like, if you ask them at the time, if you ask people what they want, they just want a faster horse. not an actual car. They're just thinking within the confines of what they're used to. So that's always the balance of how do you work with the community in a way that helps engage them, but also how do you create a space that's engaging, inclusive to push the realm of possibility even further. And I think that's a challenge with engaging with any community is, how do we make sure we're thinking about what can come tomorrow versus not what we can do with what we have today?
It's a scary thing for a cultural organization to actually genuinely seek inputs, advice, opinions about programming matters from anybody else, but including local community. And it does go back to some basic philosophical issues about the way art has been perceived for quite a few decades, in the West at least, and how funding has been organized around this idea that there is good art and that a small group of people know what that is, and their job is to make good art and bring it to everybody else. And that's fundamentally how the Arts Council of England was set up. That was exactly its mission statement, basically. That's changing, but that's how it was. And I hope that some of the people joining us will ask questions about that or make their own contributions. But I'm going to come to a question which I hope will bring debate, because engagement is about community. Yeah, Simone, you're rather like God. You just say, yeah, let there be light. It's fantastic. I mean, or a goddess at least. So engagement, is about community. And of course, some communities are in the Netherlands, everywhere, are just exclusively white. So if we're talking about engagement, you could say that the white working classes or in the Netherlands are equally disenfranchised from the cultural sector. It's not just a question of ethnicity so I want to know is, to what extent is engagement the same thing as inclusion and diversity? To what extent are they the same thing? To what extent they overlap? Or are they really quite different concepts we should be careful to distinguish?
Well, I do think that it's not the same, but inclusion and diversity are part of it. And to me, the white population is also an ethnic group. So yes, ethnicity is always also a part of this question. And since we said community can be different things, yeah, even when people are white, their interests could be different. And so it's in the little villages, I think, of the Netherlands that you might have a fully white community. And yeah, and then you have to also consider what are the problems they have, or what is their interest, or the talents, etc. It's of course it's the same thing. What are the stories that are not being told there in that area or in that neighborhood? So yes, and even that is inclusion. Because inclusion means that you take into account the different aspects of a human life, of the way, of the position people take in society. And so it could be class and gender issues, etc. And there's also intersection of all these issues. So yes, to me, it's not the same, but it's part of the question.
Yeah,
Do you understand me, Dave?
Yes.
I don't
Okay.
think they're the same at all. I think they're three independent
Yeah.
ideas and thoughts. And
Mhm.
diversity, for let's go back maybe a decade or so, diversity was really the big thing everybody was talking about. Like, we have to change the look of the room, and we have to change the sort of classic poster that we put together. We have to make sure our room is as diverse as possible. And over time, our language, our lexicon, and our learned experiences realize diversity by itself is a problem. Inclusion, I think, Ernestine, you said that greatly, is it's bringing together all the differences. Even if people may look the same, there's a lot of differences there. And I think engagement by itself is tricky because oftentimes it's a very transactional moment. I need to engage with you for this, and then I walk away. I think
Mhm.
inclusion is the precursor and the precondition that needs to exist to allow for actual engagement and sustainable engagement to happen, because your inclusion is making everyone feel welcomed at the table, if you will, or in the room. but engagement is actually figuring out how do I make this a two-way street where your voice can be heard. You know your voice is heard. I'm actually opening the door to you. It's always a position of power because somebody is in control of that door, that gate, unfortunately. But how do I open it such that it's stuck open and you feel you can engage with me all the time in a sustainable manner versus a one-off occurrence? So I think the three are different. I think diversity was a big buzzword everybody loved to talk about early 2000s, late 90s. And then equity and inclusion and started to be added to it. But I think engagement's really the personification and the manifestation of all those things when done correctly. So it's almost like you need inclusive engagement versus engagement by itself is a one-off type of occurrence, or it's a, this mythical vow you create to someone like, I want to engage with your community, but I actually don't do the work. So they all need, it's a word that needs action to carry them forward.
That's right. Inclusive engagement. I like that.
Okay, thanks a lot. Now we're getting closer to the point where I'm going to throw the floor open to everybody watching at the moment. But I'm going to finish with a question which, well, I trailed it to you in advance, so it shouldn't be a surprise to you, but it's close to my heart because for a lot of my career in the cultural sector, my career has been about fundraising. Now, I mean, these days, to be honest, I have more gray hair, so people tend to ask me for general strategic advice, business planning, including some quite big philosophical questions like the ones we're talking now. But for a lot of my time working in the sector in different countries, it's in the end been about the money, raising money from, particularly from donations or possibly from different marketing planning and so on. And one thing that people unused to fundraising are very cautious about is asking your community, specifically the audience, but I'm thinking now also more widely about community, asking them to support your work financially. What do we think about that? Is that part of engagement, or does it run across engagement? Is it the enemy of engagement?
I think it is part of engagement because it's one of the things where I feel if you can get skin in the game, dollars in the game, currency in the game, you're helping to support me in a longer lasting way than just coming to an event or coming to a program or magnifying anything we're doing. Everything unfortunately costs, and we try to make things as accessible as possible when we think about arts and culture. But everything costs, and there's a limited funding we can get from the government or from any financial backers. So I think it's really imperative to ask for the community and to hope that the community does support you financially, but it's also making sure you can do a lot with a little, meaning the growth of microtransactions and micro donations have been really successful in some cases when the community feels involved, meaning, a couple $10 donations might be easier one, or 20, 30, $40 donations if I know that I have that opportunity to give small. So really, I think it's give what you can whenever you can is really the motto I like to keep, because for some people they can give $25 a month. They might not be able to write a check for $300, but they can give it in smaller increments. And on the other side, you do have sort of the bigger whales who can give you $1,000, $2,000. So I think the financial component is another way, and really it's a way that it's hard and it feels sticky to ask your community to give you money sometimes, but you think about so many practices that are very rooted in the community. Giving is part of that practice because it's what they believe in. You think about religious organizations, like I tithe to you because this is something I value and know, and for many other reasons, but one of them is I want to help support you in any which way possible, more than just walking in your doors, or back to the organizations, more than just buying a ticket on a one-off occasion. I want to figure out how I can give to you to help contribute to your longstanding wealth, because I value your resource and I want to do what I can to help support you. So I think it feels hard and it's always tricky when you go back to those communities to ask for money, but it ties all the way back to what we opened up to, meaning if you've been engaging with your communities for so long, asking them for money should not be that big of a challenge. It's when you are only sort of dropping in when I need you, very like much like a parasite, like I want to get this from you and then I'm jumping out. That's when you run into the issues. Is again, you only come to me when you need me. So I think it's important that we are engaging with our communities every time it's possible, so that when it is time to ask for money, which it should always be welcomed, you feel like you're doing it out of genuine care, and the person wants to give because they feel like you've actually provided for them, and it's a space that I feel welcomed at.
Thanks. In the Netherlands, that kind of fundraising from communities audience is less usual than it is in the US, partly because of much higher government funding. But Simone, Ernestine, you have any thoughts on that question of asking your community for financial support?
Well, I think it's also a way of creating a freedom for yourself, because when you are so heavily subsidized by the government, or by the city council, they also ask something that you might not want to give. So the less money you would need from them, but you get from the community, it also offers you a specific kind of freedom. And I feel like if that's how you explain it, the community would be more interested in being a part of this.
Yes. Yeah, we are discussing this lately. The importance of becoming more independent of government funding. And nowadays in the Netherlands, even though it's just for the last 10 years, I think, the crowdfunding is becoming something, you know, people, when they know why they have to donate, then you can see that they do it. There are very successful projects and actions. So I think that will develop itself and we will be part of it. For us, it's more difficult to get donations from companies, big companies or wealthy people, things like that, sponsoring. I see that the sponsoring, that, for example, the bigger theaters, the conventional bigger theaters and museums, that they get sponsoring from these, the banks, etc. And that's a little bit difficult for us. And I think that should change also.
Well, I'm going to draw this part of the seminar to an end because I want to have a wider discussion. But just from my professional experience, you can have this for free. Money from business is only a very small part of the fundraising income of a successful organization. It's always individual, whether wealthier individuals or a large group of smaller donors. It's the individuals who are really the big thing. And if an organization is relying a lot on business support, it's because they have not yet developed the really good money, which comes from individuals in the end. I've always thought of fundraising as a form of engagement. And one thing I've noticed during this current crisis, the coronavirus crisis, is that in the United States, it seems that an awful lot of organizations who are really well rooted in their communities, whatever kind of community that is, it could be a community of very rich bankers in New York or a community of poorer people in different parts of the earth, but those communities have now rallied around their organizations and have really helped them tide them over as much as possible. That hasn't happened in the Netherlands to a large extent, simply because the cultural organizations here have not really thought of it as a part of their long-term agenda to be good friends with their communities, mutual respect and understanding. And I think it's paying dividends now in the US. Okay, I'm going to stop that right now, but anything that any of us have said for the last hour can be questioned, challenged, and also I'd really like to hear from people's own experiences, those people who are attending. You can raise your hand. There's a button which I can never find, but hopefully you can see it, a button which is to raise your hand, and I'll see that, and then unmute you if you want to ask a question or make a comment. I see I have one question already, but fire away now, raise your hand. Iris van Eersel, Iris, you had a question. Iris, you're a colleague of mine at FSI, but you say you have a question. So if you would unmute yourself, I think you can do that. Ask your question.
Yes, so normally I'm only involved in the technical part, but for today I have a question. It very much sounds like besides the the arts, you also have the aim of inclusivity as part of your organization. So that's also, I think, why probably inclusive engagements resonates that much. And in order or addressing that, I was thinking, would it make sense to actually involve the far from usual suspects to your performances and really address them to make sure that society as a whole gets more inclusive and less polarized, for example. And also I can imagine that doing that or communicating online will automatically involve the lovers and the haters, so that you have a way of, well, raising topics to bring the different communities closer together. So I'm not sure if it's actually a question, but I would like to hear your thoughts about that.
Who'd like to contribute?
I'd like to say something. I think the usual suspects also differ based on the different communities. So I think that for I think a theater in the other part of town, which is a predominantly white theater, their usual suspects look different than our usual suspects, so to say. So I think that could be maybe we have to work on it a little bit. And I wonder how Ernestine feels about this, and also of course Atiba. I am never really interested in having conversations where there is a togetherness based on conflict. So the idea of saying like you don't really like it, but you have to come in, otherwise we're not having a full conversation. I think you can have a full conversation with the people who are actually on the same side of the story, and the same side being we love this program, we love this film, we love this book, we love this play, and that's what we're going to discuss. And I feel like in the Netherlands, there's often this idea of you have to have all sides for it to be like a valuable conversation among everybody. And I feel like having these kind of like not so much safe spaces, but these framed spaces, let me put it like this, makes it interesting for people to want to join.
Anybody else?
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah, of course, I agree with, we are from the same organization, and we developed this idea about, do we want dialogues? Do we want that at the end people have more, yeah, knowledge about something, or more, I don't know, can't find the English word at this moment, or should it be a spectacle, and should everybody, you know, should we, do we have a conflict, and the one who has the best one-liners, that's the one who wins. So we decided to have different kinds of yeah, of discussions. That's true.
But I also wonder if that's a typically Dutch thing, because I feel like when I am being invited as a non-usual suspect somewhere, that's often the tone of the conversation. So we want to invite you to debate racism. We want to invite you to debate colonialism. I'm like, I'm not really interested in that. So you see that these kind of organizations have trouble finding their non-usual suspects because we feel like we don't want to step into that arena. We want to have this conversation among people who have like a certain grace about the subject instead of selling tickets based on like the controversy.
And I think that's a great question, Iris. It's also I mean, it's a matter of resources as well. When you go into when you go into sort of your usual suspects as defined by your program, you have to spend less resources, time, energy, money, etc., relative to the non-usual suspects. So as you go further out, you have to spend a little bit more time, and sometimes time is a really trickiest resource, right? I have a program in a month. I need to divide up my pot of resources so I can encourage those who are my usual suspects to attend, but then how much time can I spend going elsewhere? I think it's great whenever possible to invite others to be part of the audience who are other in the sense of the non-usual suspects, because through the beauty of arts and the culture, it's one of the things that reminds us that we're human. We can all gather together to enjoy something, and we can quickly look at a piece of art and have a thought, I like it or I don't like it, here's reasons why. And it really creates a way to create a more inclusive and just better world. But unfortunately, oftentimes when you go out to the non-usual suspects, the others for the sake of conversation here, it's just a matter of how much time can I invest in just getting to the seat where you will listen to me, to then bring you into the room. Because oftentimes you go to some places like, yeah, you're not welcomed here, or sometimes you have to the battle, you struggle. But I think with art, it's figuring out how in a short amount of time I can do as much work as possible to show that the world is actually a beautiful place. And I think, David, to your question earlier with the online platforms and the online worlds, it's leveling that field a little. I think about this conversation we're having now. We are, you guys are in the future technically. We're time zones apart, but we're having this discussion in a way that I can learn, and I've learned, and I can also share as well. But we're creating this global world that's united by one moment in time. You do lose some of the texture. I think that what Ernestine was touching on earlier with being in a room to hear something, see something. As a children's museum, 95% of our space is tactile and touch. So you do lose that when moving to online. But I think we're in the really early infancy of online digital programming. And I think what the future may hold will be great. But we're right now in like the very first days of dial-up internet, and we couldn't let anybody go on the phone because you were going online at the same time. We're still figuring out how to do this. And to your question, Iris, I think the digital platform provides a space to do that because we can now reach globally to people who are not usual suspects because they can't come to your space, or they haven't felt welcomed in your space, or they just didn't know about your space. But it also requires a little bit more resource to make sure when you create that space, it as protected as possible. Because if I know I am a racist and I can get into the Zoom link or the GoToMeeting or the like whatever platform we're using to broadcast, I can then come in there and just completely railroad your show. So it increases a need of protection and safety for the audience and the people who are on the performing stage. But with this global advent we're in right now, we do have a chance to reach people who were reticent to coming to our spaces in the physical, who'd be more open to see something online because, like, all right, all I have to do is click a link, I can watch, and if I don't like it, I can just close it. I don't have this like awkward moment of walking up mid-performance because I'm disrupting the room because I sat through a performance for 20 minutes. I realized this is the worst 20 minutes of my life. I need to leave. I can't walk out the theater without everybody looking at me like, oh my gosh, like why is this person leaving? Now I'm digital, it's like, yep, I'm just gonna close out or I'm gonna turn off my camera. So I think, Iris, I think we're in a point right now where we can actually show how beautiful the world can be by bringing them together through technology. And we're like we're all figuring out. I think this shift that many museums and cultural organizations and arts organizations had to do in the late spring is highlighting that we've never done this before. So we've seen a lot of missteps, and we're starting to see things get on track and get on stride, and people know how to invite somebody, how to password protect. Like we're learning, and I think it's interesting because we're all adults or adult-like, and we're in a time where we actually are learning, and our kids and the youth are actually much better at this. So we have a chance to engage with that community about how can I do this better? How can I do this differently? Like, do I need a TikTok channel as well? So I think we have a chance with technology, Iris, to get to that space where we can reach the usual and non-usual suspects or the captive audience and the others to allow for them to learn from us and also figure out a way that we can learn from them so that when we're able to get back into physical in-person experiences, that person might travel again 2 hours on the train or 3 hours by a bus because they really were connected to you digitally and they want to experience it in person and really get the rich textures that come from seeing a dance and feeling the fabric move or hearing the sounds and things like that.
I see we'll have to look at the question of digital media properly at a future seminar. I mean, it covers everything. It certainly covers engagement communities, but it certainly impacts business models. And at some point, it's a question about the kind of art we're producing, if actually we know that a large part of it will be presented online. So we'll definitely come back to that issue. Just on the question of, Iris was talking about, also having to put up with the haters. I mean, we know about those extreme cases online, and I suppose you can have those extreme cases physically in a building as well. I mean, shows have been disrupted. Museums have had people protesting outside. I remember the Death of Klinghoffer, an opera by John Adams in the Metropolitan Opera in New York, was cancelled because the Jewish community objected to it, even though most of them had not actually seen the production, but they just heard it was anti-Semitic. So that's these kind of issues can arise physically as well as online. One more gentle, more less extreme thing I've heard many times from people I work with in the cultural sector, clients, friends, is there's a great anxiety about seriously engaging in dialogue with communities. because people imagine that they're going to have to spend all their time defending their actions, and they're going to have to hear things they really don't want to hear. And occasionally either accept them or, I suppose, explain why they're not going to take that on board and know that they're going to continue doing what they do. It seems to speak to a great lack of confidence amongst the people who run our organizations about being able to talk coherently to different groups of people about the work we do. And anybody want to raise their blue hand? You can also ask a question through the Q&A, which is also below on your screen.
As the questions come in, David, I think I'd love to connect on that too, is part of the challenge I feel many arts and cultural organizations have is they are perceiving themselves that they're being perceived as the expert. So when you engage in this dialogue with community and somebody asks you a question, you're worried about either answering incorrectly or is not having the answer readily available. So as a result, you sort of walk away from that potential. You know, when people are turning to you because I'm coming to your theater because you're supposed to be the expert in theater, and I ask you a question about some production from 10 years ago and you have no idea what I'm talking about, then you as a arts organization are walking away from that a bit more because I mean, it's a scary thing to be in a space where you don't know the answer to something, but it's also the space that we have to understand because it's an ever evolving time that we're in. And unfortunately, we have to realize we don't know it all. And I think that's one of the hardest things, is sometimes we feel like I have this entity and here's who I am, so I should be the profound expert. But I don't even know half of the things I don't know. So that's why engaging with the communities, especially when we think about online, but just in general, is a scary thing to do. But it's also welcome because you shouldn't have to spend too much time defending yourself if you didn't do anything wrong. That's a quick proverb from my parents whenever I was getting in trouble. But you know, if you didn't do anything wrong, you shouldn't have to defend yourself. But if you did do something wrong, you should use this as a chance to learn from it about how it impacted the others, because you did this thing not knowing it was wrong, or not hopefully knowing it had this negative impact on others, but it did. Now let's talk about what happened, because I see you're frustrated. I see I've offended you in a way that I didn't want to. What can I learn from this experience so that I'm going to move forward? But when you are ready to learn, and also when you're doing everything with the best intent, even the best intent sometimes falls short. So that's why it's important to go back to the engagement component, because I need to learn every single day so that when I walk away from whatever world I'm in this community, the community feels like this was a space that was welcome for them. But this learning aspect is, I think, one of the things that's hard for arts and cultural organizations to really understand and digest. Is even though I am the production house or the production space, I also need to learn. And it's hard to understand that. For me, it's hard for people to really be on board with that, because sometimes they think they're supposed to be the expert who is teaching everybody who walks through their hallowed halls.
It's the high priest problem again, isn't it? Ernestine.
No, I was, while he was talking, I was thinking some theaters are organizing what they call critical friends. And then it's like, you know, people from the community and others whom they ask for advice or for a critical reflection on their work and the impact of their work. I think that's a good initiative.
Okay. Now, again, just to encourage people who are attending to ask questions, to make contributions, we'd also like to hear your experience and your thoughts. You can press on your blue hand and I'll see that coming up and unmute you, or you can ask questions in the Q&A. Now, in a physical conference hall, if I'm chairing meetings, I occasionally pick on people. It's very cruel, but I do that occasionally. I'm not going to do that now, but you know, think carefully, just in case I change my mind. If you have anything to say or to ask, please do that now. Because otherwise, I think that we can draw to a conclusion. It's time for a cup of tea for me. I'm English, so I have to do that. Other people may hit the bottle of whiskey. I'm going for a cup of tea. I'm going to start winding up, but you still have time to ask a question or make a contribution. I'm going to start, obviously, by thanking our three panelists. It's been a hugely enjoyable debate. They not only have they addressed the question we had in front of us today about engaging and why it is engage or die in the long term, really it is, I do feel that. Also, they've raised questions which we may now have to look at in future seminars. And I hope it's been enjoyable for everybody who's attended. And we would welcome feedback from those people attending. We'll be sending out a questionnaire after this session. The session has been recorded, so we'll also let people know when the videos are uploaded onto YouTube, so you can look back at them later and share them with other people. These are open seminars. Panelists, any final thoughts from you, or shall we? We have somebody saying thank you very much. Well, that's a great contribution. That's a very good thing to say at the end. I appreciate that. So it just means to see that you are real people and not just little colored dots on my board here. But thank you all very much. And really, it's been a great conversation. I hope to continue it in different forms in the future. Thanks, everybody, and goodbye.
Yeah.